Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And for everybody that is new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. Of course, you can subscribe on iTunes, on Stitcher, of course on YouTube, also through RSS feed. You can hear me replayed on Friday nights on a host of stations, including awake.us, and also on Saturday nights, 6 to 8, out in Utah on KYAH. So there are lots of ways to listen to the show. And of course, if you want to support my work, then you can always become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month by going to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond. And on that note, I want to thank two new subscribers to Patreon. So thank you, Jimmy, for recently signing up. And thank you to good friend of the show and a repeat guest, Keelan Balderson from wideshut.co.uk. Keelan also just signed up. So thank you, Keelan. It's always great when fellow contributors and guests and friends sign up. I don't know. But anyway, I am feeling a little sick, if you haven't already noticed from my voice or my lack of enthusiasm. So forgive me if you hear me coughing or sneezing. Just sort of getting over a cold. But we are welcoming back good friend of the show, Robbie Martin, of course, of Media Roots Radio. Oh, God, I really do sound terrible. Robbie, how have you been?
I've been good, Pierce. Thank you for having me on.
Excellent. Yeah. How were your holidays? Exciting, terrible. I don't know. How are you with the holidays? I'm sort of like it's a mixed bag for me.
I mean, this year was pretty chill. Family was a lot closer, so it's pretty relaxing actually. I mean, it's a pretty small holiday gathering, so it was like, it's easy breezy this year actually. So.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I would say the same for me. I judge a good holiday like this based on, the amount of times I get into arguments with my family, and there really weren't any. There was, maybe like a slight one. So it was a pretty good holiday. Of course, though, we had, I guess that brief respite. And I mentioned this last week on the show. We did this Star Wars themed review show with my sister, and we sort of did that on purpose just so that we didn't get into all of this sort of horrific stuff that is going on in the world. But of course it is it is now the second week into 2018, and already the saber rattling between the US and North Korea has reached new heights, and I mean, I'm talking even just in the past few weeks, if you can even imagine that.
Yeah.
And I guess I would bring people. Robbie, I'm sure you saw this, but for people that haven't, I mean, this is just to give the listeners out there a flavor of the levels this has gotten to. On January 2nd of this year, we had Donald Trump tweet out, quote, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from this depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works! Exclamation point. So, that's just an example of this sort of level of political rhetoric that we've been seeing. But Robbie, that's what we wanted to focus, at least here in the first hour, on this, as I said, this sort of saber rattling, which is almost, it's not even just saber rattling. Now it's like really kind of into another realm. But quickly, Robbie, what is your kind of take on the political climate in the U.S. vis-a-vis this issue with North Korea? What have you been kind of seeing unravel, especially, now into January of 2018?
Oh God, I mean, it's hard to know where to start. I mean, I guess I could take us back to the very beginning of the Trump presidency, where there were signs that even though certain neocons in D.C. Pretended like they hated Trump, and Trump pretended like he hated sort of these regime change neocons, there were very early signs that Iran and North Korea, sort of these two remaining quote-unquote rogue nations from the Bush era of the axis of evil and of PNAC, the Rebuilding America's Defenses, there were still signs that there was that train, I will almost describe it as a moving train. It didn't start moving after 9/11, but it definitely accelerated. And there were signs that that moving train wasn't going to stop, that had been moving ever since 9/11. And I think that when you look at it that way, that this is some kind of machinery that keeps moving forward and keeps moving us into these regime change wars, it would almost be naive to think that it's not going to keep moving and that somehow it's just going to stop or slow down because America will realize, it's too reckless, we're going to lose too much money, or, thinking that some world body will step in to be like, you can't do this. I mean, at this point I would say that unfortunately, it's naive to think that, because look at what America has done so far, regardless of all these things, regardless of our amount of resources or ability to take care of our own country, or what any world's government or body says about us, or even what our own citizenry says. So just to encapsulate the discussion in that, I think is important because, there's really no reason to think that the people in charge don't want to take out the regimes of North Korea and Iran. And I see it as not that they're going to be taken out as an inevitability, but that we're going to seriously try to as an inevitability. And, the Trump administration has already signaled that they want to escalate in both areas. And specifically with North Korea, because that's what we're going to be mostly talking about today, it was obvious from the very beginning, even the neoliberal resistance characters, before Russiagate really took center stage as the reason why Trump was evil and the new Hitler, before that, they actually had their finger on the pulse, in my mind, a little bit more realistically, where some of these neoliberal resistance figures were saying, what if Trump tweets us into a war with North Korea? Yeah. And that was one of the things that they said at the time, where I was actually like, well, that's a genuine concern. Out of all the dumb things you guys are saying, that's a genuine concern. So is the idea of, and then also they were saying more crazy things. Like I was even saying, look at the normies are going truther now, because even people like, I think it was Tom Friedman, was suggesting that Trump might do his own 9/11 in order to shore up his power. So in my mind, those kinds of speculations were way more realistic and on the nose than what's happening now, where it's like, well, there is some things about Trump losing his mind. The focus right now seems to be all about Russiagate and Trump's mental health, where doesn't seem to be much concern from that same neoliberal establishment that he is escalating us into seemingly a war footing with North Korea. And that he's gone further than any previous administration really has in terms of not just the rhetoric, but the actual drawing up war plans, first strike plans. And other administrations have gamed out, game theory, gaming out, doing these sort of contingency plans. They've always been in sort of the Pentagon playbook, but this is different because we actually have reports now that they're drawing up actual first strike plans that are beyond just sort of contingency plans. So very, very scary. And there's a whole lot of other stuff to cover in terms of, the escalation over North Korea, but that's just immediate right now. It seems as if they have crossed the Rubicon into deciding that a first strike is worth the risk. So that's where we are now.
Oh, and I would just echo that, and to shamelessly plug another podcast of mine. This is very much what Christoph and I were talking about with the recent Porkins Great Game that we did, talking specifically about the unquiet frontier. That in reality, the neoliberals, the neocons, all these groups that are supposed to be at one another's throats at all times, and they're supposed to be opposed to, Trump, the isolationist. All three of them are actually in complete agreement. And we're actually seeing that, while we criticize Trump, or we make him out to be sort of like a lunatic for, talking about the size of his nuclear button compared to Kim Jong-un, this is, that rhetoric might sound kind of crazy, but that's exactly what the neoliberals and the neocons are urging for. We do have the bigger nuclear button, and we will push it, and we do have to get rid of them. So we are seeing this sort of confluence of ideas sort of coming together. And as you just said there, Robbie, I mean, this is going beyond just the sort of the average military exercises that South Korea and the U.S. Do all the time. This is getting into more like, well, what happens after a first strike? Which is really quite horrifying. Especially, not that North Korea's army is the greatest in the world, but it is a huge army. It's not, this isn't like, the sort of like proxy fights that we have like in Syria or Libya or stuff. I mean, we're talking about a modern army, with a top-down command structure. And soldiers that are willing to fight and die for North Korea and things like that. And I just wanted to just quickly just sort of mention, I mean, there was sort of this glimmer of hope with the resumption of talks between the North and South, and we have the North will be participating in the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang in South Korea. They're going to send a delegation. But of course, John Bolton and people of his like, jumped to Fox News to sort of denounce this. This is a joke. This is a show. They shouldn't even be talking. Again, now, I'm not saying that these talks really amount to much, but at least they're not trying to kill one another. I mean, talking is always better than all-out warfare. But of course, John Bolton doesn't see it that way. And Robbie, I want to kind of jump because, again, as you were saying there, we have crossed sort of the Rubicon, and I think this really became apparent to me, and I was sort of I don't know, I was a little naive to this maybe myself, but you actually pointed this out on a recent episode you did with Abby on Media Roots, talking about this. It was on December 20th of 2017. The Japanese newspaper Ashai Shimbun published a wild story. Okay, I mean reckless, we might even say. Talking about North Korea loading anthrax onto ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles, according to an intelligence source here, which I guess they're referring to some, Japanese intelligence. And then this was, and there's really not a lot of sourcing. I mean, I'll link up obviously to the article, but calling it an article is almost a joke. I mean, it is like a press release from Japanese intelligence, probably. Or
you could argue, I mean, one of my theories, and I didn't really articulate this very well on the podcast, but what I meant to say on that podcast you're referring to was that I believe that it's a signal of Trump and Abe's deep relationship with each other, and how it's possible that the Trump administration is just leaking things out into the Japanese press to try to start a chain of events that way. That was one possibility that I saw, is that it wasn't actually Japanese intelligence, that it was straight from the Trump administration. But that's speculation on my part. But
and I mean, it wouldn't surprise me too. I mean, and Abe is not obviously not a blowhard like Trump, but does come from this far right, militaristic, section within Japanese politics and society. So they are very much in line when it comes to that. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if that wasn't, Trump just sort of leaking information directly to the Japanese press. And then, and I believe even in the article or in other things, they even like cite like Trump's national security stuff as like some national security memorandum that Trump came out with, you know, as like to further back up this bogus claim. And then this was followed a few days later by a story that was sort of viral that, you know, everybody was reporting on, that a recent North Korean defector who is believed to be a soldier, although we're not sure which soldier it is. There have been several that recently defected, including this one that was like shot at on the border, and that video was everywhere. But there is a recent North Korean defector who supposedly, according to multiple outlets, had anthrax antibodies in his system. Thus, the sort of idea here is that he was either immunized against anthrax because he was working with it, or he had been exposed to anthrax and lived, and this is why he, you know, and then I guess had taken something to save himself. But again, these stories came within like 7 days of one another. And it's interesting that these stories came so late in the year, and I want to get your take on that. But Robbie, I mean, what you are sort of like, I mean, you're at least my go-to expert on this anthrax stuff, and I want to talk about the sort of historical roots of this, because this is, you know, reminiscent of the build-up before the invasion of Iraq, where we had these crazy anthrax stories popping up in the media. Of course, we can all remember Colin Powell shaking the, you know, vial of anthrax at the UN. And then, of course, what is undoubtedly a U.S. operation that exposed numerous people in the U.S. to anthrax in order to justify going into Iraq and other things. But Robbie, what did you make of this? These two bizarre stories when they first appeared?
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, immediately in my gut, I'm just like, wow, this is really obvious war-making propaganda trying to set the stage using virtually identical propaganda that they used during the build-up to the Iraq War. That was my initial reaction to it. And, you know, in my mind, I'm starting to get nervous of the idea that we might start seeing signs of some kind of anthrax attack. And my first go-to suspect would not be North Korea, obviously.
Yes.
It would be the United States. Now, the reason I say that was, you know, and then I'm making such a wild speculative leap there, is not because, you know, I'm a conspiracy theorist and, you know, and I look at anthrax through a conspiratorial lens. It's because it's really actually hard not to look at anthrax through the lens of that the U.S. government actually was behind it. I mean, so talking about the 2001 anthrax attacks. Now, there's been other signs, you know, since then, since 2001, that the U.S. government has been losing a whole lot of anthrax in the mail since then, in other instances. Now, one of the most recent examples of this is in 2015, the Pentagon actually had to admit that they lost or they accidentally sent live anthrax to 9 different states and including a U.S. airbase in South Korea. And after that occurred, over 23 soldiers in South Korea, American soldiers, were infected with anthrax. It's very troubling to me that there's, I mean, and if you look into all these stories of these lost anthrax shipments, these quote-unquote accidental anthrax shipments, basically what it allows for is for, let's say in the future, you know, God forbid some weaponized anthrax gets sent out or used as a weapon of some kind, that if it came from a U.S. lab, you know, if it was determined to come from a U.S. lab like was the case in 2001, it will virtually be impossible to trace it back to its source just based on how many, if you look at the chronology of how many times we've just lost anthrax in the mail being shipped out to different scientists or labs over the last 15 years. I mean, it's actually pretty incredible when you look at this. And where did all this anthrax go? Has it all been accounted for? No, it absolutely has not been, which you can find out in the reporting. So that's a very, very troubling. So basically the stage has already been set in my mind for some terrible false flag provocation of some kind using anthrax. You know, and I guess one of the, you know, possibilities that seems to be, you know, something that crazy administration might consider doing is launching something against South Koreans during the Winter Olympics of some kind. And this is just all complete speculation on my part. There have been other people who have speculated that the Winter Olympics would be, the perfect time to do something like this. And I can't entirely disagree with that point of view, because I'm looking at what happened during the Sochi Olympics, which is, as far as I'm concerned, was sort of used as a distraction for the flashpoint in Ukraine, in Crimea. I believe that that's when the United States government and other entities decided to escalate that coup attempt in Ukraine, was during that time period. So, this could serve as a distraction, but at the same time, I'm talking about terrible worst case scenarios here. We might not even need to stage a provocation that awful to get us into a war with North Korea, because in my mind, the Trump administration is crazy and brazen enough to launch a first strike on North Korea without consulting Congress, without even needing a provocation of some kind or doing it out of retaliation. I think that we have actually entered into an administration that is willing to launch a first strike on North Korea without any real provocation whatsoever. Just rhetorical threats is enough in their minds to do it, because apparently they've already decided to do it based on rhetorical, just the rhetoric. So that's very scary. So, to me, both things would be scary, but, if there was a biological attack in order to get us into a war, to me that would just make it more obvious that this was a false provocation to get us into a war, especially in light of all this propaganda leading us up to this idea that they have ICBM missiles that are going to be tipped with anthrax. I mean, that's just classic, regurgitated John Bolton era propaganda. That was things that George H.W. Bush was saying in his administration that was being whispered into his ear by his neocons about Iraq tipping in. And if you really think about it, let's just be honest here about biological weapons. They're not effective weapons in combat. They depend on wind conditions. It's already, right out of the gates, you have pretty much a terrible strategic weapon to use. And then on top of that, using a missile tipped with a biological weapon, that just doesn't hold water. We're talking about, people have done this before with chemical weapons like sarin gas, but not a living organism like anthrax. It just doesn't really hold up to basic scrutiny. There's really been no proof or scientific evidence that this is even a weapon that could be utilized effectively. That's what's so strange about it. It's like, just on its face, it's not believable.
Oh, and I would say, to back up that claim just right there, I'm taking this from the National Interest, okay? Not this is a very mainstream publication.
And let me just mention really quickly, that article that I think you're about to read from is more skeptical about the claim than even the Vice article about it, which just regurgitates all the straight-up propaganda. So I think I know which, but sorry, continue, the National Interest article.
Yeah, this was, North Korea building missiles armed with anthrax that can hit America, question mark. And, they, as you said, they're quite skeptical of, basically what's in, Ashai Shimbun, this report that came from the Ashai Shimbun newspaper. But, they for instance, they quote a missile expert, Vipin Narang, who's an associate professor of political science at MIT. And he's done all sorts of other, he's worked in, consulting and stuff. And he says that he's skeptical that anthrax would even survive the missile reentry. So you're talking about an ICBM is going all the way up, I don't even know how many miles up into the stratosphere, and then is going to come back down, that it would burn up before, anthrax is destroyed by heat. So they're skeptical that it would even be alive, that the bacteria would even be alive during reentry. Not to mention, if this is an ICBM, once it hits something, there's going to be fire everywhere. So, can you even, would it just be destroyed on impact? And as you said too, this, chemical weapons traditionally, we could even, we can go back, in time. They were used in, things like, the British and then later the Americans, poisoning people with smallpox with blankets. They were giving blankets to people. Even hurling sick bodies into, back in ancient times, catapulting dead bodies. But when you get into, even in World War I, there are numerous cases where, they would shoot some mustard gas and the wind would change direction and everyone would die. The people that were shooting it would all die. We've seen this time and time again. I mean, these ideas that you can't control it. Whereas, a much more, I would say, easy method, one that you can apply in a much simpler way is, sending anthrax in the mail. Or as you talked about before, Robbie, I mean, accidentally shipping anthrax which is, I want to go back to that at some point because, I mean, how in the hell does the U.S. military accidentally ship anthrax somewhere? I mean, this really leads even more, that lends even more credence to the idea that the original 2001 anthrax attacks had to have been orchestrated by the U.S. I mean, this is just crazy. That they're accidentally sending anthrax around, and like you said, has it all been accounted for? How are all these soldiers being poisoned with anthrax? But yeah, I mean, this notion that they could even tip missiles with anthrax is patently false. I mean, there's no concrete proof that anyone is doing this.
No,
you know what I mean? Let alone North Korea.
Well, it's interesting because it's almost, in a way, you could almost look at it as an inverse Iraq propaganda build, because with Iraq, we knew that at some point in time that they were trying to develop anthrax, and they said, at least on paper, that they had a bioweapons program. And this was in the 80s and 90s. So that was what we were using, and even Paul Wolfowitz later will say, all that other stuff about WMDs wasn't important. To me, the most important thing was the anthrax, because he knew in a way that was sort of their one plank that had some validity to it. Now, of course, someone needed to send anthrax out to the American public in order to make that plank really have the validity it needed to. But aside from that, they also had to combine the false narrative, completely false, invented in a vacuum narrative that Saddam Hussein was enriching uranium and had a nuclear program as well as a bioweapons program. With North Korea, we already have, proof that they have a nuclear program, that they have low, small yield nuclear weapons, but now we're also adding in this complete fiction that they also have a bioweapons program and they're also planning to, launch their ICBM missiles tipped with anthrax. So it's almost like I see it almost like it's like you need a double-fisted narrative to really make it as scary as it needs to be to the American public. It's like one type of WMD isn't enough, doesn't cross the threshold for the real adrenaline fear response to kick in. So it's almost like you need not just nukes, but you need bioweapons also to make people really freak out. And that's kind of what I feel like is going on now, and it does reek of John Bolton. I mean, he was saying Cuba had a biological weapons program. Back in 2003, he wanted to put Cuba, he was trying to convince Frum and other people in the Bush administration to put Cuba in the axis of evil. So, I mean, it's just total pure fantasy. But it doesn't matter,
No, and I think there's something more terrifying about bio and chemical weapons as opposed to, say, a nuclear bomb. Even though, of course, I mean, a nuke is going to do way more damage, both in the immediate and in the aftermath. I mean, you're talking, there are, people are still getting sick, from, just think about, Iraq, all of the depleted uranium from American-made bullets. I mean, there are places in Iraq that have higher cancer rates than anywhere else in the world because of all of the depleted uranium. So, you're talking about, hundreds of years half-life with some of these things. Yet, there is something, and I kind of get it too. Anthrax terrifies me, or the idea of some bioweapon is somehow more terrifying. It's, I guess I'm not trying to be flippant, but at least, if a nuke goes off, I guess you just hope you're vaporized, you know what I mean? Whereas anthrax, this could be days where you're, coughing up your guts or something like that. So, and there is something just more terrifying, I guess, about the idea of chemical warfare. And that, of course, is just a great, way, as you say, to just sort of amp this all up, kind of bring it to a fevered pitch. But I mean, Robbie, here's another thing I want to throw at you too. I guess I honestly wouldn't be surprised if North Korea did have anthrax or did have some sort of bio or chemical weapons. I mean,
I agree.
All major nations do. I mean, there's nothing like new about this. I mean, don't point fingers. I mean, I would say we, and then probably next, maybe Russia and the UK, have the most sophisticated bioweapons programs. And it's not like we're, if anyone has ICBMs tipped with anthrax, it's probably us.
Yeah, and probably just like some experimental, like idiotic design, It's like, no, what you just said is true. I mean, I really have no real reason to doubt that North Korea, as far as being, attempting some kind of strategic defense method, has cooked up some biological weapons over the course of its history. I mean, that's, to me, seems likely. But what they're saying here is different than that, is they're basically trying to raise the fear levels and make us, it would be like as if, actually that was a bad comparison. I was going to say it would be like if all of a sudden people were saying the U.S. is about to launch a bioweapons attack. But actually that would be much more likely. But it would be, yes, they may have these programs, and maybe there's even some idiot in the North Korean government who talked about putting anthrax in an ICBM missile.
Sure.
But the idea that they have them and they're ready to use them on Japan and South Korea and all these other things. I mean, here's the difference between, the reality of them having a bioweapons program and the propaganda is that basically there's already strategic plans in place to literally send in raids to remove their weapons of mass destruction. When I was saying earlier that we're in a scarier place now because there actually seem to be plans being written up, like first strike plans, it's actually gone beyond that, because these are actual post-war plans that are actually being done as drills right now by South Koreans and United States forces jointly. And they actually have a drill that was being done over the Christmas break, barely got any press whatsoever. This is actually what makes it to me more dangerous, is these aren't being announced by Trump. He's not tweeting about these. This is all being done behind the scenes by seemingly, allegedly his more rational advisors. And this is from Newsweek from December 21st. It says, the U.S. military is conducting exercises to prepare for the infiltration of North Korea and the removal of its nuclear missiles. According to reports, hundreds of troops from the U.S. and South Korea conducted a joint training exercise dubbed Warrior Strike last week. And what's interesting is, so it actually says, the headline is, U.S. forces are training to capture North Korea's weapons of mass destruction. But the headline originally said, U.S. forces are training to capture North Korea's biological and chemical weapons. And the only reason I think that's interesting is because it's like, wait, why did they change the headline here? Was it too obviously a parallel of Iraq war propaganda?
Right.
Do these people have some self-awareness where they're like, wow, that sounds way too similar to like a Fox News Bush era Iraq war propaganda talking point. We got to change this. I mean, it's just it's really, really crazy actually how similar the parallels are to that propaganda. And if it was just that alone, I would be, scared. But it's not just that alone. It's that they're actually preparing to do this. And apparently it wasn't even, Trump who decided to open the door for this. It was McMaster who, this whole time we've been led to believe is an establishment neocon who's sort of in opposition to Trump. But apparently he is opening the door to this. Rex Tillerson was the guy who was actually leaning towards negotiating with North Korea. But that's no longer the case either, apparently, is that they've all sort of changed their tune behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't think there's no one there that wants to. Well, that's what's so ridiculous, too. I mean, like, I saw some quote from Trump a few days ago. He said, oh, sure, I would talk to Kim Jong-un if he wanted to. And it's like, would you? Honestly? I mean, you're bragging about the size of your nuclear button on Twitter with this guy. And it just, I'm laughing here because it's like, you almost have to, But yeah, I mean, they've all completely changed their tune. I mean, they've poo-pooed any of these talks. They don't want to have any, negotiations, nothing like that is going to matter. All Trump's at more sanctions, and then these like veiled and mysterious threats about, obliterating North Korea. And I guess that kind of brings me to, the second part of this sort of talk on the North Korea stuff. I mean, is the complete lack of like, anti-war sentiment here in the U.S. towards this. I mean, obviously, I think the anti-war movement is dead. Or is, on its last legs. I mean, there's so few people that are truly opposed to war in all of its forms. Everyone can kind of make an excuse. Well, but not with this or that person, and this deserves, us going massacring people. But we've demonized the North Korean people to such a degree, Robbie, that it is, I know you and Abby talked about this. I mean, it's like almost impossible to find people that are willing to, kind of stand up and defend average people in North Korea. Now, I know that, we're told there are none. Yeah. I mean, they're all either sort of cultists, that, adhere to Kim Jong-un. And again, this is a wonderful, even if they were cult members, that doesn't give us the right to kill. I mean, this is, sort of off topic, but, it was okay to burn all of the Branch Davidians alive. Well, they were cult members. So, they don't really count as real people. And that's how we view the North Koreans. They're either all cultists who, deserve to die, or we really don't even see them as like real people. We hear these horror stories that there's no real proof for. This is all, much of it is hearsay. People eating one another up in the hinterlands, near China. Mass poverty. I mean, so even if that's true, so what? We should just kill them all? That's like a better life, I guess. So I just wanted to get your take on this. And but before I throw it to you, Robbie, I will just say, a quick aside. A friend of mine, who I traveled with when I was in Palestine. He is Japanese and Korean. And on his Korean side, some of his family still lives in the north. He has traveled to North Korea several times, and I can attest that, he said it is a poor country, but it is not the sort of like this, and he was not in Pyongyang. Okay, he was north of Pyongyang, he was in this supposed area where everyone's eating each other. And he can attest that was not what he saw. There are just regular people that live there. Obviously they're poor. When my friend Sarah was there, he was followed by a North Korean minder, most of the time until he bribed him to leave him alone, which he did. And that's what their job, they're there to get a bribe. But, just as an aside to that is just that there are regular people that live there. And even if they were all crazy cult members, what is that? Does that give us the right to just, vaporize them with a missile strike? And Robbie, let me throw it to you, because this is like the second part to this conversation, that just gets completely overlooked.
Well, it's just really sad that you even have to make such an obvious declaration, because it's like, of course it's not right. Even if they were the most brainwashed cultists on the planet who I mean, it doesn't justify any of it. And like you just said, I mean, it's like, it's such a closed off country. Part of the reason why we're able to project all of this sort of fantasy style propaganda about how crazy and evil and, ridiculous the country is because it's such a closed off society. That's sort of a holdover from the Korean War, is that they've closed off their society, but it basically creates a vacuum that Americans and other propagandists are able to just create whatever propaganda narrative they want about them. So it's actually really hard to know what's true and what's not coming out of the country. If you're a skeptical person, that is. If you're a non-skeptical person, you'll just believe everything you hear coming out of the country, that they eat human flesh, that Kim Jong-un kills his relatives with wild dogs in front of a crowd full of people, etc. You won't question any of that stuff. But it's it's really, really problematic to me because it's actually even worse than sort of trying to look at Saddam Hussein and trying to defend him against military attack. Because, I can't sit here and say that Saddam Hussein was a good person. I'm not going to defend how he ruled Iraq, but I will defend Iraq's right to sovereignty and his right to remain in power and not, have his country invaded. But it's like you get into these framing traps. I mean, I'm sure you remember, they still happen all the time, where it's like, well, what, you still want to see Saddam in power? Like you still want Saddam to be in power to oppress and gas his own people? It's like, no, dude, that's a totally false framing you're trying to set up to like trap me into like a logical fallacy. That's not how this should be talked about. But yet you're going to see people talk about this in the same way. That's the problem, is that it will all be framed in sort of this sort of illogical framing where you only will have one, it's like, when did you stop beating your wife? I mean, that's how ridiculous the framing is. It's like, well, no, I don't love Kim Jong-un. I'm not like a fan of his. I'm not a fan of really any world leader, but still I will defend his right for his country to have sovereignty and not be invaded by the United States. I will completely stand up for that right. And I think a lot of people feel that it's like there's no way to defend that, and that it'll just make them look bad to defend that. But it's like, at the very least, defend the North Korean people. If you feel like you can't go there in your mind, just look at all the people that are going to be killed from something like this and defend their right to live, regardless of what government they live under. I mean, because ultimately it was not even, even if you hate the North Korean government, it's not their choice what government they live under. Are we going to blame people around the world for their governments? That's just not a moral way to look at things in humanity. So, any way you slice it, people should really have a lot of compassion here for the North Korean people, to have the right to live and to live in peace. Their leader is saber rattling sometimes, but look at how many people we killed during the Korean War. They have a reason to be scared. They have a reason to want to project this toughness to the rest of the world. Because honestly, let's be realistic. If they didn't have a nuke, do you think they'd still be there?
Oh, absolutely. That's the only thing at this point keeping the U.S. out. Look at every other, evil dictator out there, Gaddafi, Saddam. All these people that got rid of nuclear or got rid of their, WMD programs. They're all gone. They're either in jail or they were murdered. Again, exactly. What incentive is there for Kim Jong-un to get rid of his nukes? That's the only thing that is keeping the country together in many ways, as horrible as nuclear weapons are. And again, it's, like we're one to talk. We're the only people, and it's, the U.S. government, the only government to ever drop nukes on people. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so it's rich coming from us, telling people what they can and can't do with their nuclear weapons. And Robbie, an interesting point you made there too. Cause I get that too, maybe not even with the Saddam argument, but you get that with like Assad, like, oh, you like Assad,
of course,
because you don't think that, butchering people all over Syria with, with jihadi fighters backed by the CIA is a good thing. That means you love Assad. But there's like almost, even with an Assad type character, even like Saddam, even though I think Saddam was really just, he was an opportunist, obviously. But there's like some sort of like, I don't know, tinge of like maybe they they were sort of independent or they there was like something about them. With the North Koreans though, it's like they've become this like cartoonish depiction of evil. So much so that, as you said, it's like, it's sort of like impossible. Like nobody runs on like a pro North Korea platform, and,
except for like really hardcore communists or leftists. Some of those people do, but that's a huge, that's a total minority.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm sure you've seen some of those people on Twitter, which I don't really understand that either. But, that aside, as you said, it's like really hard to kind of, come to the defense of just average North Korean people. And I don't know, I guess it's just like shocking to me, that they're really, I don't know. I mean, like there was that moment like before, what was it? Like, when Obama was sort of contemplating bombing Syria and there was such a pushback, but you don't see that at all with North Korea, even amongst the supposed anti-war left or left,
I know, right?
There's like nothing. It does not exist. I mean, again, we've demonized these people and created such a cartoonish image of both the North Korean, government and the Politburo there, but also down to like average people that like, again, essentially like they're either all cult members who deserve to die or they're in such dire straits that I guess death is a better answer than I don't know, living. I don't know. I mean, what does that say to you just as like a human being that we've like reached that sort of level?
It's really, really sad. I mean, I am actually personally baffled by the idea that whatever is left of the anti-imperialist movement, anti-war movement in the United States, I'm actually quite baffled that they are not more concerned about this. And the only explanation I can think of is that the Trump administration is doing a good job of keeping most of it behind the scenes, keeping most of it in the realm of, just like policy papers and stuff. Which is strange because that's not Trump's style. It doesn't seem to match up with his style. Like the fact that he would even tweet that about the button being bigger is, that's the normal way we might expect him to escalate a war situation. However, I think what's happening right now is very interesting because while the neocon think tanks are even still pretending like they're scared of Trump's rhetoric with the bigger button, they've been egging on all this other stuff he's doing behind the scenes on their own channels too. So it's like they are aware that there's an escalation behind the scenes in the Trump administration, like in the Pentagon. They're egging that on, and they're probably excited about that, but they don't want Trump's crazy rhetoric to ruin that. So it's like there's a weird balancing act going on, where it's like that if Trump decides to launch a first strike on North Korea, that Bill Kristol, David Frum, Max Boot, they're going to be right there behind him.
Yeah.
Do you think they're going to take the North Korean people's side?
No, of course not. No, that'll be his he's a true president now.
Yeah, or even
he's massacred people.
Yeah. No, it is absolutely insane. I mean, so yeah, it is really, really, to me, really scary the way that this stuff is just going on behind the scenes. And I think that, that's the only reason I can really think of as to why the anti-war movement isn't picking up on it more. It seems like the anti-war and anti-imperialist movements in the U.S. seem to respond best to obvious, center stage war pushes, like sort of propaganda pushes. And the fact that this is sort of on the back burner and it's not taking center stage is, I think, what's just making people sleep on it. I mean, it seems like the anti-war movement, what's left of it here in the U.S., is mainly focusing on Yemen, Saudi Arabia. They've pretty much dropped the ball completely on Afghanistan. I mean, that's been the case with the anti-war movement for at least a decade or more. They don't seem to care that that's going. And I don't really know what that's about. And sadly, the only explanation I can come up for that is that the Afghan people are just not as sophisticated and as civilized, according to the rest of the world, as like Iraq or other people in other countries are. So it's almost like they're more dehumanized in Afghanistan. So it's like less of a concern that we're just like occupying their country still. They're all like, they're all farmers and they don't have running water. So it's like, who gives a crap? But I really don't know the reason, Pierce. I mean, it's a mystery to me, but I do think it also has something to do with the other thing you brought up earlier, which is that most people don't see themselves as defending the North Korean government. They can't put themselves there. It's like it's too cartoonishly evil to defend. I mean, I think that's...
Oh, yeah. No, it's like they're embarrassed. To do, it's like they don't want to look like a nut who's defending them. Or, it's like you either fall into two camps. It's like you're the crazy person that's just defending North Korea, I guess, to defend them. Or this like weird, far left communist Twitter armchair activists who, think that the North Koreans are just amazing. It's like both of those are like kind of lame, I guess, but, you can just defend, I don't know, just defend them because like you don't want to see all out chaos and destruction. But no, I think it's like sheer embarrassment. They don't want to have to explain it. They don't want to have to be that person at the dinner table, defending Kim Jong-un. And I mean, it goes to, the credit of the sort of U.S. imperialist state and their decades of propaganda against North Korea to the point where it's like, they're, as we've been saying, they're so cartoonish. They don't even deserve the sort of like obligatory war is wrong, we shouldn't be doing it. It's kind of like they're the exception to the rule. Like everyone can be in favor or just sort of not really care. It's like, well, they're just North Koreans. They're all nuts anyway. So, we'll just sort of turn a blind eye. And I guess quickly, because we're coming up towards the end, and I'll throw this to you, Robbie. I mean, I find it interesting too, some of we've got, the protests in Iran, which seem more and more like they started off as somewhat real with sort of problems with the economy and, have slowly now been co-opted, or not slowly, quite quickly by, groups like the MEK, another cult group, and, Israeli intelligence, U.S. intelligence, Saudi intelligence. But it's interesting to me that like with Iran, it's like, well, let's try another color revolution. And we want to save those. There's like sort of this idea that like, there are people there worth saving, and we can look at this, the picture of that young woman who took off her veil and she's like standing, waving. It's like, yes.
Which is actually from before the protest started, by the way. That
photograph
was not from the protest.
It's sort of like, well, that's worth it, but with North Korea, it's just like, we have to have like a more straightforward ground war where it's like, it's about killing more of them.
You're absolutely right.
I don't know. I guess I just find it fascinating, especially too that North Korea and Iran are, as you said at the beginning, the sort of like, the last remaining, members of the axis of evil. And it's fascinating the sort of differences in the approach to that. And I don't know, Robbie, I mean, anything you want to say on that before we sort of, end the first hour?
No, it's a really interesting paradigm you just brought up, because I think what you just described, we're sort of seeing a collision of sort of the Obama era of doing regime change versus the new way. And when I say the new way, it's really just the old way. It's sort of the rebranded neoconservatism versus the old style neoconservatism. And I would argue that even during the Obama administration, there was definitely stuff that seemed to be sort of massaged by or aided by the State Department and U.S. media about North Korea that seemed to be making an attempt, at least, but, more like in a Vice-style way, not a real, genuine, authentic attempt, but an attempt to humanize the North Korean people. So it did seem to be some kind of attempt to, not to try to maybe they did, I don't know, to try to stoke some kind of protest movement there, but there seemed to be movement in that direction. And I'm not saying it wasn't for cynical reasons. I mean, I don't think that, the people who want to take out the leader of North Korea actually really care that much about the people. But I do think that switches now when Trump gets into office. But we're seeing the dilemma of the neocons deciding how they're going to talk about Iran. And a lot of them want people to forget that they were the primary people wanting to just bomb Iran and actually attack them. So now they have to basically say they support the people. They're caught in kind of a bind.
No, absolutely. And we will be continuing this conversation and getting into some different topics in the second hour with our good friend Robbie Martin. So stay tuned.
to the world's meeting place. American.
It's practically narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes. I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys because they have all the technology. They have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms. And American English is loaded with euphemisms because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it. I'll give you an example of that. When I was a little kid, if I got sick, they wanted me to go to the hospital and see the doctor. Now they want me to go to a health maintenance organization. Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that. The CIA doesn't kill anybody anymore. They neutralize people. The government doesn't lie. It engages in disinformation. Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists. Contra killers are called freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight? They never mention that part of it to us, do they? Never mention that part of it.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control 0 out. Control is good. 5. Roger, copy. 3. 2.5. 2. 1. Decay.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us now in the second hour, we are joined again by our good friend and frequent guest on the show, Robbie Martin, and we've been discussing this insanity with North Korea and anthrax and weapons and all of that sort of stuff. And of course, I forgot, Robbie, to have you plug your excellent work on the Anthrax attacks. And so tell people where they can go to check out your work on the Anthrax attacks back in 2001.
So I made a documentary film. I would call it a short documentary film because it's only about 40 minutes long, called American Anthrax. It's completely free to view on YouTube. I did an update of it called American Anthrax 1.5. That is got a little bit more information in it. It has quieter music. There's a little bit of changes that were done to it to make it a little bit just better and more informative, and you can show it to your grandparents without them getting weirded out by some of the music choices that I put on there. But basically, it summarizes that the 2001 anthrax attacks and kind of lays out a case that not only did the Bush administration and neocons try to use the attacks as a primary plank for the Iraq war propaganda campaign, but it also makes the case that the person that they were pinned on eventually around 2007, Bruce Ivins, actually couldn't have done the attack, at least not by himself. So that he must have had accomplices. I also show plenty of evidence in the documentary, too, that the actual people the letters were sent to, including politicians Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy, that they didn't believe the FBI's conclusions, which is quite strange considering that the anthrax actually came from a U.S. bioweapons lab. It was a weaponized strain of anthrax, weaponized by the U.S. government. So that's what I show in my film. Another film series that I did that actually has some stuff about anthrax in it but isn't really about anthrax specifically is A Very Heavy Agenda, and I go into things the neocons said about anthrax and some just bizarre kind of startling predictions they made leading up to the anthrax attacks, that after 9/11 there seemed to be kind of this excitement, almost like an orgasmic ecstasy from certain neocons hoping and wishing for a second stage of terrorism after 9/11, which they did get. And many of them actually predicted what form that second stage and how it would come, and they predicted it would be anthrax, and they were correct. So that's stuff that I put in more into Very Heavy Agenda. And then since the Very Heavy Agenda, some of my follow-up research on the anthrax attacks have led me to a whistleblower named Matt DeHart, who is in jail right now. And he claims that while he was working as a drone intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army, that he got contacted by an FBI whistleblower who gave him a cache of documents essentially showing step-by-step, showing him all the puzzle pieces connected together of how the CIA was actually behind the 2001 anthrax attacks, and that it was actually a CIA operation designed to get us into the Iraq war by murdering, who knows how many people, but they ended up murdering 5 American citizens in order to create this propaganda landscape. But according to this whistleblower, part of the reason that that he thinks the CIA did it is because there are traces of radiation this is something the public doesn't know about. This is never publicly released. And if this is true, it's very alarming, is that this radiation that was found on the anthrax spores actually is traceable because radiation leaves a trail, and it was traceable back to a location other than the location the FBI claims that it came from, which again points to the CIA source. So that's another interesting revelation. And then in the end, apparently Dick Cheney quashed that part of the investigation. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission was actually assigned to that part of the investigation, and he quashed it himself. He personally intervened to stop it. So there's a whole lot of rabbit holes just with anthrax. I'm currently working on links between the Trump administration and various people close to the Trump administration and the 2001 anthrax attacks, specifically Rudy Giuliani, and even Mike Pence, who claims he was an anthrax victim in 2001.
Oh, that's right.
He went on the media he went on the news with his family to get Cipro treatments at the hospital. I mean, you can look up Mike Pence and anthrax on YouTube, find a bunch of weird stuff. Rudy Giuliani, made millions of dollars potentially off of the 2001 anthrax attacks, just alone, because he had a cleanup company that was ready to go right after the attacks to fumigate some of the locations that the anthrax actually hit. So, and again, Rudy Giuliani is very close with Trump. So there's a whole lot of other things. Some of those revelations are going to come out in a future documentary I'm working on. But that's pretty much where people can find it. They can go to averyheavyagenda.com. American Anthrax is the name of my other documentary, and there's a whole lot of stuff I've done out there on anthrax, including a bunch of podcasts as well.
Mm. Yeah, and the podcast I assume you can find at MediaRoots.org, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. There's a lot there. And I guess while we're back on anthrax, there's like obviously, as I said, it elicits this sort of deep-seated fear with anthrax. And you were just saying, Mike Pence and his family went for Cipro treatment, and Cipro is the drug that is, I believe it's still produced by Bayer, and it's actually used for a variety of different things, but it is like sort of the main drug that they sort of prescribe for people that have been exposed to anthrax. And just as an aside to that, before people start going out and buying Cipro, because that did happen during 2001, doctors were being inundated with requests for, that people wanted Cipro, and I guess they were like complying with this. Of course, doctors really work for the drug companies, so they don't really care. But
which
just
is a whole story. There's a whole story in and of itself about that that's very interesting. I mean, if you want me to talk about it, I can, but.
Well, yeah, no, just because it's like that is crazy too, and I do want to hear what you have to say on that. And just quickly, penicillin is also works to combat anthrax. Okay, penicillin, which has been around forever, there's more actual hard evidence in terms of penicillin combating anthrax than there is Cipro. Like the Bayer has never run double-blind tests where they expose people to anthrax and give them Cipro. Okay, the only real like Cipro studies have been done with animals, whereas there is tons of documented evidence of penicillin and anthrax working, and penicillin doesn't like cause all sorts of like long-lasting health defects the way that Cipro does. So, I mean, yeah, Robbie, quickly, I mean, what is the sort of history behind that?
Well, don't go out. I'm going to reiterate what Pierce just said. Do not go out and ask your doctor for Cipro because you're afraid of a North Korean biological weapons attack, or even if you're afraid of the U.S. government doing something like putting anthrax through our mail again, because Cipro is actually very harmful, and one of the main side effects I'm aware of that it has is you don't see it really on any other medication. Sensitivity to sunlight is one that's, it makes it kind of odd right out of the gates. You see that in the bottle, you're like, what is that? What's with that? Another side effect it has is you should not do any serious exercise, weightlifting, or specifically stretching while on Cipro because it can cause permanent tendinitis, which basically will put you in, pain for the rest of your life if you actually, do any serious muscle stretching, sort of tweak your muscle too far while on Cipro, it can seriously harm you. So it is a terrible medication. And yeah, as you said, there are other antibiotics that are just as effective in combating anthrax. That documentation is out there. And you shouldn't also be taking antibiotics unless you really need to either.
Yeah.
Because your body can build up a resistance to them. And so, yeah, I mean, just the fact that there was a Cipro rush before, I mean, this is what's something that I learned from researcher Graham McQueen, is there was this idea out there that there was a bio-attack coming after 9/11. And it wasn't just something that like neocons and public officials were hinting at. It was something that was also filtered down, into the public rumor mill as well. There was a lot of evidence that mainly rich people, richer, people who made over a certain amount of yearly income were actually privy to the Cipro warning leading up to the anthrax attacks. And there's an actual news report that you can find that the AP did talking about the Cipro rush in wealthy, affluent neighborhoods around Washington, D.C. And that's very intriguing because what does that mean? Does that mean that there were just people on the inside who were telling all their friends, and like intelligence officials leaking out to their friends that, they should get Cipro because we have evidence that this attack was coming? Because that's a really specific thing to tell people to go get. It's not, it's kind of different from telling people to duct tape their windows up to prevent, a chemical weapons attack. It's a specific antibiotic that would really only prevent anthrax infection. And what kind of intelligence do they have to say that? Because ultimately, the FBI says it came from an insider who worked for the U.S. government. So it doesn't really, when you put all these pieces together, it really doesn't make sense. It's like, why were they, or were they putting this out into the rumor mill, telling people to get Cipro because they wanted to generate hysteria, leading up to a staged anthrax attack? It's very, very odd. But what it does is it provides cover for specific officials who, for some reason or another, were on Cipro before 9/11. Not before 9/11, before the anthrax attacks. Some of them were actually put on Cipro on the evening of 9/11, including Dick Cheney's staff that we know for a fact. And if Dick Cheney's staff was on Cipro, then we probably know that George W. Bush was on Cipro, that all of the neocons inside the Bush administration were probably also on Cipro. That's why I regularly call David Cipro from. That's the nickname I've given him, because I would like to see him and other Bush officials say on record that no, we were not on Cipro on 9/11, and I would be surprised if they could say that because I believe that they were. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that somehow they all knew that that was going to be the next attack, but they were taking it like a month before it happened. So that's also strange. That also kind of maybe implies that it wasn't, a Bush administration terror attack is what I'm saying. That it could have been something a little more nuanced than that. Maybe someone was on the inside who knew, but not everybody knew. There's also evidence that Dick Cheney was apparently very scared of being infected with anthrax himself, like someone actually trying to specifically target him and kill him. And that's part of why he claims he was hiding in a bunker in, I think, the mountains of Virginia or Maryland, I think, for like almost a whole month. He was barely making any public appearances in between 9/11 and the 2001 anthrax attacks, or even in the month of October. He kind of went off the map. It's a strange sort of disappearance from Dick Cheney there. So there's so many things here that need to be re-examined. Unfortunately, there's just not enough interest in it. It's not a salacious enough or crazy enough sounding conspiracy. It doesn't hit all the sort of reptile brain, like hot spots like Pizzagate does. Even 9/11 eclipses the anthrax attacks, which I think there's a lot of extremely valid questions to be asked on 9/11. It's still much bigger than anthrax. It makes it easy, I think, for people to just not look closer at this stuff, because really only 5 people died. I think it just in terms of scale, it just kind of gets buried. But it also, the people always use the phrase memory hold, because a lot of people don't even remember this happened, which to me is incredibly strange. until you remind them of it. It's like people just have erased this from their consciousness that we also got hit by anthrax and 5 people died from it.
No, and I've talked about this before on the show. Obviously I was here in New York during 9/11. I knew people that were affected, and it was obviously horrifying for me. I mean, I was only, I was in like the 7th grade when it happened. But I'll tell you, the anthrax stuff, that might have even scared me more as a child, because there really is like, what do you do for that? You know what I mean? When it was like, it was coming in the mail, I mean, suddenly it was like, anybody could be attacked, I mean, it was horrifying. And again, there's something, obviously 9/11 was a sort of spectacular moment in terms of terrorism on the scale of it. But there is something really horrifying about the idea that someone was just sending around anthrax to virtually, anybody could be affected. And it was, and it's like, it's one of those things like you open up the letter, anybody in the room could be affected. What if you coughed on it? What if the fan hit it? You know what I mean? Like it was so
Absolutely.
kind of terrifying. Just what you were saying there, Robbie, the fact that people were taking Cipro months before, or, at least a month before, and the idea that, this was, fairly, like, if Dick Cheney is taking it, I mean, then it really sort of raises the question of who was running this program, and could it have been on such a scale that the vice president would be infected with anthrax? I mean, that is really scary. You would think, well, okay, these people are going to be protected. Even if it's an ICBM tipped with anthrax, there's no way the president and his staff and the cabinet, they can't die. It's like a Hollywood movie. The good guy can't die in this sort of scenario. But the fact that Dick Cheney was like terrified that somebody might send him anthrax, I mean, that kind of makes you wonder the scale to which this was happening, and as you said, was this some insider that was, tipping people off? I mean, which again, I think we jump to 2018 and this talk with North Korea and anthrax, that should raise serious questions. If Dick Cheney was genuinely concerned that somebody was going to send him anthrax, then that means that he wasn't actually in control of this particular operation, that this went above his head, that this was...
Or it's a smoke screen of some kind. I mean, that's one way to look at it. I mean, if you look at 9/11 and anthrax from a certain way, I think there is a legitimate argument to be made that whoever was, if you look at it from the perspective that it was some kind of inside operation, that possibly Dick Cheney and George W. Bush were not fully in the loop. And that's a whole other, strange way to look at those two events, I think. There have been authors like, I hate name-dropping Webster Tarpley. I have some serious problems with him as a researcher and for other reasons. But, he proposed the theory that, about Angel is Next, that there was actually information released on 9/11 and the day after that George W. Bush thought that there was actually an inside warning threat against him from the inside, and that's why he disappeared on his plane for hours and hours and didn't land in D.C. until the evening. That opens up a whole other rabbit hole. But I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that the closer you look at events like this, the less simplistic they get. I mean, it's almost like the more you know about 9/11 and anthrax, the less you can actually say, this is who did it. It was this country responsible. It was this intelligence. To me, it's far more complicated than that. And the only real way forward as a researcher to look at this stuff, I think the best way is to not have those conclusions in your mind. I mean, you really have to look at it from the perspective of, I really don't know who did this, but I know that the official version is complete BS. It's a cover story. But what are they covering up? I mean, that's the way I would prefer that people investigate these things. And I'm not going to tell people how to do their investigations, but it seems we've gotten way too off track in terms of the way that even, just regular conspiracy theory people look at this stuff, where they know exactly who's behind it, right out of the gates. It was the Mossad, it was It was and I'm not saying also when I talked about that Matt DeHart stuff earlier, I'm not saying that the CIA is as a slam dunk case that they were behind the Anthrax attacks. I really do not know. But I think there's some credible information out there to suggest that people in the CIA may have had something to do with it, specifically people like James Woolsey, who was the former CIA director under Bill Clinton. So, once that kind of evidence lines up with other things I've researched, then that's when I'll be like, okay, maybe, there is something probably to this, but we got to look, just keep looking and digging on that. Instead of, just sort of saying that the CIA did it and then forming all my, having tunnel vision and only looking at things that way. That's not how I'm looking at the Anthrax attacks. So I don't know what point I was even trying to make there, but
no, but I think that sort of speaks volumes to the way that conspiracy theories are viewed. Specifically, we can look at 9/11, where it has to be that, it was the Mossad that did this for the Zionists, and that's it. And maybe some of these people were, whereas when you really start to unpack it, I don't know. I mean, I almost hate saying it, but I mean, it's almost like it doesn't really matter who, I don't think there's never going to be a smoking gun, because the more you unpack it, especially something like a 9/11 that's so big, you begin to see so many different angles and aspects of it. Like the Anthrax stuff alone. I mean, that should be worth its own, sort of scholarly investigation into it. But we of course live in a world where, everything has to be sort of a cookie cutter explanation, especially when it comes to a good old fashioned conspiracy theory. And I guess that kind of, it sort of works as a segue for something else that we wanted to talk about today. And this is, you mentioned before, Robbie, that the Anthrax attacks in 2001, they don't have this sort of cachet as something like a Pizzagate, let's say.
They don't have the gravitas of pedophilia trafficking out of a pizza parlor. Apparently.
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah. And of course, Pizzagate has not entirely disappeared, unfortunately. It just sort of rebranded itself. And as another sort of interesting, connection there, Matt DeHart is alleged, right? I mean, this is what they busted him on, was supposedly, child pornography, right?
Kind of. It's a little more complicated than that, but essentially, yes.
And I only bring that up because it seems highly, I don't know. I mean, again, I've never spoken to Matt DeHart. I don't know that much about it. I only sort of know him because you've talked about him before, Robbie. Yeah. But, you go after the CIA, you have some association with Anonymous and WikiLeaks, and then suddenly you're busted for indecent images of underage boys. I mean, that sounds like classic sort of setup. And you might know this better than I, Robbie, but I mean, wasn't DeHart also drugged at one point and taken to a hospital, and he has no recollection of what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to flub the details of that. But yeah, he was. And his parents have been, part of the reason why his story is even still circulating and still talked about is because his parents were savvy enough, and passionate enough, about the welfare of their son that they keep talking to the press. They try to get the press to talk about this. And then they also have contacted some organizations like the Courage Foundation and people who've worked with Barrett Brown and various other people who are, familiar with the sort of the technical aspect of what Matt DeHart was doing, who have looked into some of the stuff that he was saying and have chosen, that his story, to believe that his story is credible. There's a little bit of a split in that community. There are a lot of people who don't talk about him and who don't make light of his case. Unfortunately, I think that the Courage Foundation itself has maybe dropped the ball to a certain extent in talking about his case, but yet apparently they still have financial support of him on their website and stuff. But that is that case in and of itself, the actual charges that were alleged, against him was, it could have been planted. It could have been a setup. But at the same time, like, I think one of the best arguments I've seen about that case and why it's sort of BS is because what was he targeted for? The fact that it was almost like that the FBI targeted him specifically for that in of itself is interesting. Let's not even look at the idea if he's guilty of innocent or doing it, which I don't personally think he was, but just the idea that he was targeted for that specifically, that crime specifically that he was charged with is barely enforced. I mean, it's interesting to see that he was targeted for that. And that alone, could be just a method, and I'm not saying Matt DeHart is guilty, but if someone, has certain psychological, weaknesses or sexual habits, and we have at our disposal this huge NSA spying apparatus, how hard would it be to entrap someone or to find some weakness about someone and use it to take them down in that way? I mean, this is me just speaking completely theoretically. So I think that you look at it either way, it's some kind of targeting, whether he was guilty or innocent.
Oh, well, and this sort of brings me back to what we wanted to get into a bit in the second hour. And I think we even talked about, we did a Pizzagate episode. I think it was me, you, and Chuck Ocelli talking about this. And we brought up that at that time, the very idea that could this not be one huge sort of entrapment operation? That, again, there is unfortunately, there seems to be a sort of growing, acceptance or sort of blurring of the lines when it comes to, like, acceptable behavior when it comes to children. You look at Roy Moore, his supporters, what is age really? And, all these sort of horrific, notions that are being tossed around, both on the left and the right, everybody is sort of guilty of this, but that's becoming more and more kind of out there in the mainstream. And we at one point posited the idea that, like, could this not be a way of just sort of, roping in maybe well-meaning, but not the smartest conspiracy theorist out there and, kind of seeing, well, who's going to take the bait? Who's going to look at these, images and who's going to go to an extreme length with this? We thought of that this was sort of originated on 4chan, that this could be some sort of an operation, or some sort of, disinformation campaign or controlled opposition with the conspiracy movement. And then lo and behold, Robbie, we get the next, iteration of Pizzagate, this bogus idiot. I almost don't. I encourage people not to even, like, look too deeply into this, because you might have to go to 4chan or some idiotic sites like InfoWars and things. But there's this, like, QAnon. This is the latest sort of iteration of this, and it originated on 4chan, of course. And QAnon, I guess, is supposed to be some sort of high-level insider, which nobody can really tell you, White House, CIA, NSA, FBI. Nobody knows. He's a high-level source, And of course, it's a he. We all know it's a man. QAnon is leaking out, information and is talking about stuff, basically insinuating that Trump is going after the pedos, that he's going to lock them all up, and that the deep state is after QAnon and after Trump. And this has been, I saw this, maybe a month or so ago, I guess, when it first sort of popped up on, Lionel, from Lionel Media, who's just become a complete and utter joke. I at one point used to like listening to his show, and he is just, drank the MAGA Kool-Aid so hard. I honestly,
embarrassing, totally embarrassing.
It's like pathetic. It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed to have ever we had traded emails for a little while. We knew each other. and I'm embarrassed to have ever known him because, I mean, he is, I mean, it's almost like worrying the degree to which, like, Lionel just went from someone that appeared to use logic to just, like, completely brainwashed into this, you know, make America great again, Trump is the answer. And I don't know, Robbie, I mean, maybe you can explain the QAnon stuff a little bit better. But this is like, you know, this is sort of the way that the hardcore Trump people have kind of kept alive this idea that Trump is this sort of great savior that the deep state is after. So, I mean, what is QAnon?
Well, really quickly before I actually talk about QAnon, I just wanted to say how disappointing it's been to watch Lionel go from someone who was, you know, to me, a smart-sounding truther, basically, to a full-blown, controlled opposition slurping, you know, MAGA drone. It's absolutely shocking, but I also think it's sort of an illustration of the danger of how powerful this, what I would describe as blatant controlled opposition narratives, the danger of how much they're catching fire and how much they can influence people in the truther movement. That's to me extremely worrying to see people who traditionally always thought that the U.S. government couldn't be trusted and, you know, didn't trust billionaires, you know, even militia people who were, you know, more truther leaning, who were part of Alex Jones' sort of cult, patriot movement cult, to have them now trusting the president of the United States and now thinking that the deep state is versus Trump, a billionaire who's filled his cabinet with oligarchs, is absolutely shameful, embarrassing, and just also extremely dangerous. Like, the fact that more people who are in those movements who are paranoid of government aren't seeing that shift as something truly dangerous and controlled opposition is actually shocking to me, that they all have their guard down that much. But just in general, just one view into this, and it goes sort of exactly in line with what I just said about sort of the militia movement letting their guard down, is QAnon, this 4chan, 8chan poster who claims he's a deep state insider. His whole narrative is now basically that, and this is something he's been Pied Pipering people down this road for months, as you've been saying. He's basically been connecting Pizzagate to all this other stuff, you know, saying that Russiagate is retaliation for the movements Trump's been making to round up all the pedos. So basically all this heat that's been coming down on Trump is because Trump has this ultimate plan to arrest Clinton, to round up all the pedos, including John Podesta and all the Pizzagate conspirators, and to throw them all into Guantanamo Bay. Yes. So this is actually part of the narrative, is that they're all going to Gitmo, apparently, according to QAnon, and hundreds of thousands of these people who are buying into this QAnon narrative. And then additionally, that when Trump goes to arrest John Podesta and throw him into Gitmo, guess what's going to happen? The Soros-controlled riots are going to burst all around the country to try to stop Podesta's arrest. And then when that happens, Trump will need to implement martial law in order to save the country. So to me, this is one of the most interesting mental gymnastics conspiracy narratives I've ever seen in my life, because it's basically convincing hundreds of thousands of patriot movement, like right-wing militia people, that Trump's martial law is going to be good. And that's like, whoa, like that is, I've never seen it get this far. I mean, that is like a full horseshoe effect, whatever you want to call it, like going completely to the polar opposite. So now to act, and then I didn't even take this QAnon thing very seriously. I thought it was just some kind of obscure Pizzagate morsel floating around there in 4chan world, convincing some certain controlled opposition-led morons that it was real. But apparently Alex Jones and Roger Stone are reinforcing it as well, and have actually gone out on their, you know, on InfoWars and said that he is about to send the pedos to Guantanamo Bay. And then I was like, wow, that's really scary. And then I actually read the martial law thing from QAnon. I was like, wow, that's even crazy. You know, that's crazier. That's scarier. But then I saw some other bizarre stuff. Like today, or actually it was last night, I went on the Drudge Report, you know, thinking, okay, Drudge Report, he doesn't talk about Pizzagate. He knows sort of where the line is drawn when he's sort of stoking the flames of this stuff. You know, he doesn't even post like that much racist stuff anymore, which is interesting because he was the one who popularized the knockout game and a lot of that stuff. So, anyways, on Drudge Report, there was a center page. The top headline was Trump receives huge applause at this college football game he went to or something. So I clicked on the video, and it was from a Twitter account. So I went to the guy's Twitter feed just out of curiosity because the tweet for some reason had like almost like barely any retweets, like 10 retweets, but yet it was running as the front page link on Drudge Report. So I kind of like felt physically sick once I clicked on the guy's Twitter feed, and every other goddamn tweet the guy was tweeting was about QAnon. And I was like, oh my God, Drudge is dog whistling people to look at QAnon. 100%. That's what he's doing. I mean, there was just no other reason to post to such an obscure Twitter account like that. And I was just like, this is really, really bad, like what's going on. I mean, so I don't know if you want to say your opinion on
Robbie,
it. But,
I'll jump in right here and say that, you know, when Trump, he retweeted from that Twitter account MAGA Pill, you know, and that was referencing some bogus poll or something, you know, oh, Trump is the most popular president ever. And all MAGA Pill does is write about QAnon. So, I mean, then you almost wonder, I mean, you know, I sort of have trouble believing that Trump is like that sort of like, wired into operations. You know what I mean? Like, I really think he's just kind of there sitting, you know, watching Fox and Friends and, you know, just sort of like left to his own devices. Like, I don't think that they would really let, you know, be like, oh, sir, you should tweet this because this is going to make your conspiracy crowd just wet themselves with excitement. But, you know, of course, though, that plays into you see, Trump is aware of QAnon. Trump is trying to, you know, he's sending us a message by tweeting from MAGA Pill, this idiotic Twitter account linked to, you know, and it's basically just, it's got to be some guy in his basement, you know, again, with a hard on for Donald Trump. And all he's doing is, you know, just sort of writing these bogus stories, you know, praising him as the greatest person of all time. And, you know, and also, you know, throwing in this like QAnon stuff. But I guess the thing that is just sort of, shocking to me. I mean, aside from, the fact that obviously Donald Trump is not rounding up I mean, he is rounding up. I know there's all these indictments, these sealed indictments, and people are constantly like, oh, you see, this is it. These are the pedos. You know, but it could be, I mean, you look at some of these pronouncements that he makes about MS-13. Maybe that's what it is. You know, they could be gang members. They could be anybody. Again, they're sealed. We have no idea who it is. But, you know, just as like another aside, I mean, all of these people that keep talking about the QAnon stuff, and then I want to get into more what might actually be at play here, they all just ignore Donald Trump's connections to Jeffrey Epstein. And, you know, I mean, again, so this guy is rounding up pedophiles while our current Secretary of Labor is the guy that gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal and cut him this amazing deal. Okay? This is our Secretary of Labor. And I have not read the article yet. JP Satilli, he sent it to me earlier today, but I am going to read it. But Wayne Madsen and Andrew Krieg, and I like Andrew Krieg, and I do sort of like Wayne Madsen now that he's, you know, he's sort of, you know, just sort of gone after Trump. And I like Wayne Madsen, but this isn't like an endorsement because sometimes I think he says silly stuff. But when it comes to these sorts of things, I generally trust them. But they have a new article that they just wrote on the Justice Integrity Project, which is Andrew Krieg's website and organization, called, and I haven't read it, but I will. But just as something to keep in mind, it's called Welcome to Waterbury, referring to Waterbury, Connecticut, the city that holds secrets that could bring down Trump. And this is all about Trump and Epstein and this young woman who accused them of raping her when she was 12 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, you know, And I trust Wayne Madsen when he says, you know, he had some sort of insider that came to him. When it comes to those things, Wayne Madsen generally is telling the truth. And again, you know, it's just something to keep in mind. I mean, there is like a real, you know, Pizzagate story out there, but it actually happens to involve our current president. But, Robbie, that kind of aside, the thing that just sort of gets me with this QAnon stuff, and this has gotten even into crazy, I don't know if you saw this, you know, there were these like reports, from QAnon and others, you know, of his ilk, talking about the Marines, surrounded, CIA headquarters in Langley, and they were rounding up pedos there.
I did not see that. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, I mean, of course, because it never actually happened.
Wow.
But, you know, that was out there. But this just reeks of the sort of, you know, classic CIA controlled conspiracy opposition handbook, just like Pizzagate. You know, I mean, it originates on 4chan where nobody knows nobody knows who these people are.
Yeah.
You know, it's obviously, if QAnon is real, you know, of all the places he goes, it's 4chan. So again, it's people, they're appealing to people that they know already kind of agree with this. You know what I mean? That was why the Pizzagate story broke on 4chan. Because everybody on 4chan is a pedophile, you know, and is trading child pornography, or they're all these like MAGA indoctrinated morons who want to believe this anyway. And that's how they sort of seed this. But I don't know, Robbie, I mean, what's your take on this as controlled opposition?
Well, as you know, Pierce, I mean, only the satanic pedophile democrats are the ones we should be afraid of. Right. Clearly, nobody on the right side of the spectrum engages in pedophilia. They're not none of them are demons. So that's the framing that everybody should be looking at this in. But sarcasm aside, that's basically what the QAnon wish fulfillment is all about. And that's what the Pizzagate wish fulfillment sort of thing was all about. And I say wish fulfillment, which is a phrase that someone used on Twitter responding to my question. It's like, what do you guys think of this QAnon thing? It's obviously BS, but, you know, what do you think of it? And someone described it as sort of a really skilled 4chan LARPer, LARPing as a deep state insider who's doing really skillful sort of wish fulfillment breadcrumb dropping over a long period of time. Just like a clever hoax. And when I say clever hoax, it's really not even that clever. If you read some of these QAnon posts, it's just like immediately the first sentence, I'm like, this is obviously fake. But okay, I'll keep reading because it's entertaining. Let me just give you an example so people know exactly what we're talking about. So here's one QAnon post. He says, "My fellow Americans, over the course of the next several days, you will undoubtedly realize that we are taking back our great country, the land of the free, from the evil tyrants that wish to do us harm and destroy the last remaining refuge of shining light. On POTUS's order, we have initiated certain fail-safes that shall safeguard the public from the primary fallout, which is slated to occur." I don't know if that's a date or what. "Upon the arrest announcement of Mr. Podesta, confirmation of what is occurring will then be revealed and will not be openly accepted. Public riots are being organized in serious numbers in an effort to prevent the arrest and capture of more senior public officials. On POTUS's order, a state of temporary military control will be actioned and special ops carried out. Rest assured, the safety and well-being of every man, woman, and child of this country is being exhausted in full. However, the atmosphere within the country will unfortunately be divided, as so many have fallen for the corrupt and evil narrative that has long been broadcast. We will be initiating the emergency broadcast system during this time in an effort to provide a direct message, avoiding the fake news to all citizens." So that's just a taste, and I've just read you a verbatim and QAnon quote. That's just a taste of what this is that's leading people into believing that there is about to be some kind of serious upheaval where Trump is the hero against the deep state villains who are all basically democrat pedophile, deep state insiders like Obama and John Brennan and Hillary, and this all, if you look at all the QAnon posts, all they talk about is they link together everything since Pizzagate to the Debbie Wasserman Schultz Wan Brothers stuff, to the Huma Abedin emails, to Anthony Weiner. It's basically like as if you've been watching George Webb's clickbait conspiracy hour and just like told it as a story on 4chan. That's basically what it is. So it's really kind of basic stuff, But I don't know, man. It's really weird how much it's catching on. And, they're even implying that Trump is dropping hints to get people to take QAnon seriously in his tweets, that there's coded tweets in Trump's tweets. I thought,
the three pluses in one of his tweets.
That's obviously,
right?
That I don't buy that, but I was kind of alarmed when I saw Matt Drudge's post on the top center of the front page going straight to a Twitter account that was all about QAnon. And I thought to myself, that can't just be Drudge posting that just by accident. He goes on Alex Jones. I don't know what he actually believes at this point in terms of this stuff, but he knows that it's weaponized and it's effective. So Drudge at least knows that you can weaponize these deep state conspiracy theories in order to make Trump come out on top.
Oh, and I want to point out again too, and I made this point when the Pizzagate story broke. The timing. Pizzagate becomes a thing, to distract from the very real claims of Trump's sexual abuse and, serious things like rape at the same time, then it was the Pizzagate story broke. This is when someone is trying to sue the presidential candidate for raping her when she was 12 years old with Jeffrey Epstein. And then what do we get? Pizzagate. And suddenly that story disappears. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily the exact same timing, but, I'm not surprised that, for instance, there's an article that is just posted by Andrew Krieg and Wade Madsen digging deeper into this, and we get QAnon. And just as to sort of tie in that stuff, one of the things that they talk about, and this is just from my brief, the first couple paragraphs in this article at justiceintegrity.org, is that one of these victims of Trump and Epstein's was kidnapped from a pizzeria. Which is why people follow some of the Jeffrey Epstein stuff. They will see that Wayne Madsen constantly talks about there is a Pizzagate story, but it has to do with Donald Trump. But no, I know what you mean though. The way that this is being fed into, again, with the Pizzagate stuff, where it was, and suddenly everyone kind of jumps on the bandwagon. And it does make me wonder if, is this not just again sort of cover for what's really happening? I know people they've been saying, that, I don't know, Trump signed some sort of civil forfeiture asset thing that's going to go after human traffickers. And they're oh, you see, this is, so what? First of all, it was an executive order. So it's virtually toothless, I would assume. And anyway, that doesn't, again, so what? What does that mean? What does it really mean for people? Nothing.
It means nothing because, there's some, there is probably some truth to the fact that what Trump promised is coming true in the sense that he's going to increase law and order. He's going to untie some of the restrictions that people like the FBI and DEA had. There's even a ridiculously propagandistic article floating around right now that came from Politico that's blatantly from a Trump insider trying to, again, throw tar at the Obama administration, saying that, he forced, or not forced, but he tied the DEA's hands so they couldn't go after a Hezbollah cocaine trafficking ring because Obama wanted to grease the skids of the Iran deal and basically not put Hezbollah in the crosshairs for running this cocaine operation. DEA insiders were very upset, and basically the whole spin of the article is Obama was supporting terror because of the Iran deal, he let this cocaine get into the country from Hezbollah, which, is that really that bad? If that's really what he was doing, that's probably, in my mind, that's one of the only good things Obama did while he was in office. There's plenty of people, and somebody raised a funny point about this. Fox News is making such a huge deal about that it's what percentage of Fox News hosts have done cocaine and enjoy cocaine? Probably a pretty high percent. So for them to act outraged.
Oliver North still has a show on Fox News.
Oh yeah, Iran Contra in charge. So, so it just really goes to show that there are these, these narratives, coming out that are basically just coming from Trump insiders that are designed to, make it seem as if and maybe there's some truth to that story, but I guess the reason I bring that up is because, again, just because Trump is maybe going harder after prostitution rings and sex trafficking does not equate to Trump as busting the pedo rings. If you look at all these stats that these morons keep talking about, and I say morons, I mean people who are just, complete partisan tools at this point, who thinks that Trump is amazing and, is great still, and don't question anything he does. They believe that Trump is actually disrupting all these pedo networks, and they're using just pretty middle of the road sex trafficking busting stats to do it. Sex trafficking is not the same as pedophilia, people. I mean, in some instances, underage women are trafficked to this country for prostitution. There is underage prostitution, but there is actually a different word you use other than pedophilia for like having sex with, late teens girls who are technically not of age. I mean, even just if you want to get semantic, it's like the fact that they're even conflating all of that with some kind of bust up of pedophile rings just shows how childlike it is. It's like not even based in any real reality. And even if Trump was somehow busting pedophiles, or his Justice Department was at a slightly higher rate, that still doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't. So it's like the whole fantasy is based on this idea that these elite pedos are about to go down, including Eric Schmidt. QAnon claims that Eric Schmidt resigned on the date he did because he's getting prepared for the pedogate roundup. It's like, are you kidding me? So what is Trump doing then? He's just getting all the lower level pedophiles now as sort of a prelude to arresting all the elite pedophiles? Like, why did he wait so long to do that? None of it adds up. So basically, what will happen if he doesn't arrest any of these elite pedos? Are they just going to move the goalpost to another plank of like the conspiracy narrative? I mean, will they start thinking Trump himself is part of pedogate if he's protecting these elite pedos? Because there's a lot of promises being made right now that just seem ridiculously, cartoonishly unrealistic. So I don't even know how his own supporters or the QAnon supporters are going to be able to hold on at a certain point.
I don't know either, but I'm shocked that they've stuck around this long to begin with. So I wouldn't be surprised if they can just be convinced of it's secret, or we have to wait until the next term. Because then he'll be a lame duck, so you won't have to worry as much. Who knows? They'll come up. I think they will come up with something to sort of some get out of jail free card for this. But you are right, Robbie. I mean, serious promises are being made to the conspiracy crowd, and if El Presidente doesn't follow through with this, I mean, what does that say about it? As you said, I mean, is he involved? Is this all a hoax? I mean, there's serious, I never thought I would say this, but serious political ramifications, especially considering that, again, this group that's supposed to, never trust the government, don't vote. They all voted for Donald Trump. They will vote for him again. I feel like that is what this really kind of boils down to is, whoever QAnon is, who I assume is probably just some, Trump lackey, in the White House or somewhere, who goes on and does these things because, this is a rallying cry to his political base. And everyone kind of knows that they can cash in on, be it Alex Jones or Lionel or any of these other moron clickbait so-called journalists out there. They all know that they can kind of cash in on this, and it makes them seem like they're in the know and they're cutting edge and whatnot, and so they'll all make YouTube videos about this. But I don't know. I mean, it is like, to what end? And also, I mean, it's just so obviously controlled opposition. I mean, seriously, it's like, what?
It's the most blatant version of it I've ever seen.
I know. I mean, and it's just like, what have we been doing as a movement, the conspiracy movement, for the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 decades? If we can't even realize, when we're being conned, and not in a very clever way either. You know what I mean? This isn't like a really sort of like deep, complicated con game. This is a really simple one. But anyway, we are at the break. Or at the end of the show. Robbie Martin, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, everyone can go to averyheavyagenda.com to check out all of Robbie's films. You can also go to mediaroots.org, where him and Abby do weekly podcasts, which I highly encourage. So, Robbie, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Of course, if you want to support me, you can go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond. But anyway, I will be talking to you all very soon.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio,
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys because they have all the technology, they have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Assassination. You know what's interesting about assassination? Well, not only does it change those popularity polls in a big hurry, but it's also interesting to notice who it is we assassinate. Did you ever notice who it is? Stop to think of who it is we kill. It's always people who've told us to live together in harmony and try to love one another. Jesus, Gandhi, Lincoln, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John Lennon. They all said, try to live together peacefully. Bam! Right in the head. Apparently we're not ready for that. Yeah, that's difficult behavior for us. We're too busy sitting around trying to think up ways to kill each other. Here's one we came up with. It's efficient, too. Genocide, you know? Killing large numbers of people simply because they don't look like you, they don't talk like you, and they don't have the same kind of hats you do. You ever notice that anytime you see two groups of people who really hate each other, chances are good they're wearing different kind of hats. Keep an eye on that. It might be important.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, rocket copy. 3, 2, 1. Decay.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.